The 1970s at 1969 Finals MVPs. We are here at the last 11 Finals MVP awards for this ranking series. I hope that you have enjoyed this series thus far, and I hope you enjoy this final video. Obviously, I have included Jerry West's MVP from 69 because I didn't want to leave it out, but I also certainly can't make it its own ranking video as it is the only one of its decade, so I decided to just stick it in here. Once again, hope you enjoy the video. Let's get into it with the bottom of the C tier, Wes Unseld in 1978. Now look, I always say that Wes Unseld is a historically underrated player because he did not score a lot of points. And maybe I'm a hypocrite here, but even though this man was there for defense and rebounding and not scoring, I just can't put a Finals MVP where you had averages of 9 and 11 any higher than the bottom of the C tier. He was 7th on his team in scoring. There just appear to be a whole bunch of other guys who contributed more than him. I know he played great defense, and to be clear, I don't know this series especially well. I am not incredibly informed when it comes to anything about the Sonics or the Bullets of this decade. They were great teams, but I just don't know them as well as most teams because they're not talked about like teams from the 80s onward, or even the other great teams of the 70s like the Lakers and the Bucks, for example, or the Celtics. So I put Wes Unseld down here at the bottom of C tier. If you can justify a reason, if you know this final series well and you can tell me what he did that was so great that he deserved to win the award, please let me know in the comments because I'm not an expert on this series, but from what I can see, this had to be at the bottom of the Finals MVP list because just nothing really stood out about it to me. Next up in the C tier, I'm going to go with Willis Reed in 1973. I almost said 83 and then, you know what, I said 73, it's fine. 1973 Willis Reed, the Knicks played the Lakers, and while this series was fine for Willis, he gave you about 16 points and 9 rebounds. His efficiency was decent, but not great, but decent. I mean, this was just kind of a full team effort here, and that's going to be the case for a couple of the Finals MVPs in the B tier as well. There were a lot of these where these teams were well-rounded, they were deep, they had great starting lineups where everyone was contributing, and you just kind of had to give the award to someone. And so this just happened to be the guy who edged out the others for the award. I'm not saying Willis Reed didn't deserve it, and he had a solid enough final series, but ultimately, this was a full team effort by the Knicks. They were a better overall team than the Lakers. They had to give the award to someone, but his stats don't stand out nearly enough for me to put this anywhere other than the C tier. Moving into the B tier now, I am going to go with JoJo White of the Boston Celtics in 1976. Now, this was a decent finals performance, especially for someone like JoJo, who is a player that pretty much never gets talked about if you're looking historically, especially for a finals MVP. I'm willing to bet 90% of people could not tell you anything about this man other than the fact that he won a Finals MVP. I, personally, know very little about him other than this Finals MVP. And in the series, he played decently enough, about 22 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds. His efficiency was solid, but not great. And I'm not going to say he didn't deserve it, but this is just another case where he wasn't a clear standout guy. You could make a very strong argument that Dave Cowens deserved this Finals MVP. He scored almost as much as JoJo, only 1 point less, but he shot it on 8% better from the field, and he gave you 16 rebounds a game compared to JoJo's 4.5. So when you look at this, I don't know if he even really deserved the award, and even if he did, his stats just weren't all that impressive, so I have him down here at the bottom of the B tier. Next up, I'm going to go, who did I say I was going to put here? Dennis Johnson of 1979. These guys are all pretty close, so it's hard for me to remember who I had where. Dennis Johnson of the Supersonics. Another great player, another great and very underrated team. I actually made a whole video about the Supersonics in the past of this season. The most underrated championship team of all time, and they were led by a big three in Gus Williams, Dennis Johnson, and Jack Sikma. And the three of these players were all extremely important in winning this series. Dennis Johnson ultimately ended up winning the award with 22, 6, and 6, along with 2 steals and 2 blocks. He had a pretty darn good series overall, pretty impressive counting stats, but at the same time, he didn't lead his team in any category other than steals. He wasn't the main scorer, he wasn't the main facilitator, he wasn't getting a ton of boards, he wasn't their best defender. So as good as Dennis Johnson was, and he had a pretty solid final series overall, I do believe he deserved this award, but it was a team effort all around. You know, the big three all contributed in their own ways. They were all extremely key to winning this series. I can't put him any higher than the middle of the B tier because of how much his teammates also contributed. Next up, finishing off the B tier, I am going to go with a potentially controversial choice here, and that is Wilt Chamberlain in 1972, one of the most overrated finals performances, in my opinion, of all time. And the reason it's overrated is because it's Wilt Chamberlain, and Wilt Chamberlain fans will tell you how he went and he beat the New York Knicks. This is what I hear all the time. Wilt Chamberlain beat Willis Reed of the New York Knicks for this finals MVP. He went back, he got his revenge from 1970, and he beat the super team Knicks that was an absolutely stacked team. And the truth is, he beat the New York Knicks without Willis Reed. Willis Reed was hurt in this series, he did not play a single game, so what he did was beat up on a backup center against a team without their best player. That's what Wilt Chamberlain did. Now, I still have it at the top of the B tier because 20 points and 23 rebounds with excellent defense, very good efficiency. It was a great series, especially when you consider Wilt Chamberlain's age, and Jerry West was having a really bad series. This was a historically good playoff performer. This dude was getting locked down by Walt Frazier in this series. This was, in my opinion, the best series of Walt Frazier's career. He was absolutely incredible, a very underrated player, but this is about Wilt here, right? Wilt did exactly what you wanted him to do. He went out, he dominated the backup center who he was playing, and he won the finals MVP, deservingly. But with that said, he was not facing a superstar, he was not facing an all-star, he was not facing an average starting center. He was facing a backup center for a team who also happened to be missing their very best player. So I cannot put this any higher than the B tier because it was just Wilt doing what you expected of him. And I know he was old, but he was also the same people who want to go, oh, well, he was old, well, how much more did you expect him to do? Are the same people who want to sit there and praise the fact that he was doing this while old and talk about how great he was. So you can't have it both ways. Wilt played very well in this series. He deserved the finals MVP. Can't put it higher than a B tier, personally. Entering the A tier now, this was a tough section to do because this decade really had a lot of impressive finals MVPs, and I had to go with Willis Reed from 1970 at the bottom. This was a phenomenal series for Reed, especially the Game 7 performance. No, his counting stats don't jump out at you, but the defense he played, despite being injured on Wilt Chamberlain, was incredible. Wilt went off for, I believe, 45 points in Game 6 of this series, and that actually really inflated his scoring stats, so it looks like he was better than he was, because throughout the rest of the series, Reed absolutely clamped him and made him his bitch, okay? Wilt Chamberlain was dominated by Willis Reed every single second he was on the floor. Reed deserved this finals MVP. It was incredible, but I can't put it any higher because his scoring stats just weren't that great, and he did have a very good team around him to support him in the series, not to mention he did miss a whole game of the series. Like, him coming back in Game 7 was incredible, but he also missed an entire Game 6, so that does really matter. Next up, I'm going to go with Bill Walton from 1977 here. This was an incredible final series, an incredible player in Bill Walton. He had one of the greatest two-year stretches of all time from this year and the season after. He did everything for his team. Absolutely everything. He was good for scoring, he was efficient at it, he got a bunch of rebounds, he played well, he played great defense, he did everything you could have possibly asked him. With all that said, however, he was not carrying the team by any means. He was not the lead scorer. He was not their best playmaker. He was not doing it all on the offensive end. On defense, 100% their best player. He was incredibly important for them. But on offense, Bill Walton wasn't really contributing any more than at least two other players on his team were. So I can't put him any higher simply because of the amount of help he had. Meanwhile, someone who I think played slightly worse if you're just looking at the stats, but was better because of how important it was for his team for him to play this well, is John Havlicek. Havlicek is just slightly ahead of Walton. This is his Finals MVP from 1974. The man was incredible in this series. He scored, he playmade, he got rebounds, he played defense, and they just barely won a clutch 7-game series against the Milwaukee Bucks. And while I do think Bill Walton had a better individual performance in his finals, Havlicek did it with less help. He was not as good of... What am I trying to say? He did not have as good of teammates as Bill Walton had in his own final series. They needed every little bit of what Havlicek provided to barely eke out a win against an incredible Milwaukee Bucks team. So that is why I am putting him up here, slightly ahead of Bill Walton. Finishing out the A tier, I am going to go with Kareem's first Finals MVP in 1971. This was peak Kareem. He was scoring a ton of points, he was doing it incredibly efficiently, he was blocking shots, he was playmaking, he was rebounding, he did it all. But he did have a very good team, and he was facing a completely outmatched Washington Bullets team. So as good as Kareem was in this series, and he was really freaking good, we're talking about 30 points and 18 rebounds good on almost 60% shooting, he was not good enough for me to put him in S tier simply because of the competition, and maybe you think that's unfair, and if you do, please feel free to put him in S tier on your own list. I'm not going to fight you about it, but for me, I think the last two Finals MVPs I have here stand out. The first one being Rick Barry in 1975. You want to talk about a guy who did absolutely everything for his team? Look no further than Rick Barry. He was incredible, especially on the offensive end, throughout this entire historic playoff run, and also in this finals. He was giving you 30 points, a bunch of rebounds and assists. His defense was good. His efficiency was not great, but when you look at his help, of course it wasn't great. Of course it wasn't great. His second best teammate was giving you 11 points a game. Rick Barry needed to do everything for this team on the offensive end, and he did it. He came out and he got it done, and he won a championship. Not just a championship, but he swept the opposing team in a series that they were supposed to get swept in. The Warriors were not supposed to be in the finals, number one. And number two, once they got there, they were not supposed to stand a chance. And in an incredibly close series, I believe every single game in this series was decided by single digits, all four of them. Rick Barry was clutch. He was an incredible scorer. He made the big plays. He deserves to be in the S tier. But he was still not better than Jerry West in 1969. I really didn't want to put this number one, simply because Jerry West... Why is this not going? There we go. I didn't want to put it number one, simply because he did in fact lose the series, but despite losing, this is one of the greatest finals performances of all time. This is one of the greatest finals performances of all time in a series where his teammates Elgin Baylor and Wilt Chamberlain both completely choked. Jerry West went out there against the Boston Celtics, and he gave you 37 points, a whole bunch of assists and rebounds. He played excellent defense, as he usually did in his prime, and he was efficient while doing it. For his era, he shot almost 50% from the field while scoring this much. That is absolutely insane. This is one of the greatest finals performances of all time. There is a reason, other than just the fact that it was the first finals MVP, there is another big reason that they had to give Jerry West this award despite being on the losing team. It was historic, it was incredible, and it deserves to be number one on the 1970s Finals MVP list, despite not even coming in the 70s. Thank you all for watching.